Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a real historical whodunit, one that's fascinated people for ages. The Honnō-ji Incident.
That's right, the assassination of Oda Nobunaga in 1582. By his own guy, Akechi Mitsuhide.
Exactly. We know the what, the when, the who, basically, but the why. Well, that's still a huge debate, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and that's what we're digging into today. We'll explore the different theories about Mitsuhide's motives, the classic ones, and then the more conspiratorial Black Hand ideas.
And we're doing this mainly through the lens of historian Yuichi Gosa's work, right? Especially his recent YouTube lecture.
Yes, exactly. Gosa revisits his earlier thoughts from his book on medieval conspiracies and adds his latest analysis. It's a great guide through all this complexity.
Perfect. Because the big problem, the reason it's still such a puzzle, is that Mitsuhide himself didn't exactly stick around to explain himself after the betrayal.
No, he was defeated and killed pretty quickly. So we're left piecing things together from, well, circumstantial evidence and how people interpreted it later on.
Okay, so let's lay the foundation. What are the traditional explanations, the ones that have been around the longest?
Well, you've basically got two main ones. The grudge theory, or eikon-setsu, and the ambition theory, yabusetsu.
Grudge theory first, then. That's the oldest one. The idea is just pure personal hatred between Nobunaga and Mitsuhide.
Pretty much. That Nobunaga treated Mitsuhide terribly, humiliated him, and Mitsuhide finally snapped. It's the classic personal vendetta narrative.
But hang on, didn't Gosa, citing Takanagi Mitsutoshi's research, raise some serious questions about that, about whether that bad blood was even real?
He absolutely did. Takanagi's argument, which Gosa highlights, is that most stories about this terrible relationship, they pop up much later, mostly in the Edo period.
Ah, so not contemporary accounts.
Right. There's a lack of solid evidence from the actual time showing this constant abuse. So that whole image of Nobunaga relentlessly picking on Mitsuhide, Gosa suggests we need to be really careful with that.
Okay. So Gosa basically challenges that deep personal hatred as the main reason.
Yes, the takeaway is that the evidence for that intense grudge just isn't as strong as tradition suggests.
Interesting. So if it wasn't necessarily a personal vendetta, what about the other big one, ambition? Did Mitsuhide just see his chance and decide he wanted to rule?
That's the yabusetsu, the ambition theory. He wanted to take over, seize power for himself. Simple as that, supposedly.
But again, Gosa points out, there isn't much concrete proof from the time that Mitsuhide was actually aiming that high, does he?
No, there really isn't. Much like the grudge theory, contemporary evidence directly showing Mitsuhide plotting to become the next ruler is, well, thin on the ground.
What about that poetry collection, though? The Amegashita Heikunen. I seem to remember there's a line in there people point to.
Ah, yes, that's the key piece often cited. A verse attributed to Mitsuhide goes something like, Toki wa ame ga shiru satsuki kana.
Which translates to?
Now is the time. The rains know the 5th month. But the wordplay is crucial. Amegashita can mean under heaven, as in the realm, and shiru can mean to know or to rule.
So now is the time I rule the realm. That does sound ambitious.
It certainly can be read that way. But Gosa brings in Kuwata Tadachika's research here, offering a counter-perspective.
Okay, what's Kuwata's take on it?
Kuwata argues, and Gosa highlights this, that Mitsuhide probably recited a slightly different line, Ame ga shita naru, meaning the rains fall. Much less dramatic.
Ah, so the idea is the shiru, the to rule part, might have been changed later.
Exactly. Kuwata suggests it was altered after the fact to make Mitsuhide look like he'd been planning this all along to fit the ambition narrative. So thanks to Gosa flagging Kuwata's work, even this key piece of evidence is really debatable.
That really weakens the ambition theory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And Gosa also mentions Kuwata had other reasons to doubt it.
Yes, Kuwata's broader point, which Gosa finds compelling, is about timing and status. Even figures like Hideyoshi or Ieyasu, known for their ambition, really only made their big power grabs after major events shifted the landscape. So, the idea that Mitsuhide, who is essentially a mid-level commander, would seriously think about overthrowing Nobunaga at his peak, Kuwata found that improbable.
And Gosa connects this to how we view Nobunaga.
Yeah, Gosa suggests maybe we overestimate Nobunaga's invincibility and conversely underestimate Mitsuhide's own strategic thinking or the specific pressures he might have been under. It's not necessarily about grand ambition.
It feels like we're searching for this huge motive because Nobunaga was such a dominant figure, which leads us nicely into the Black Hand theories. Maybe Mitsuhide wasn't acting alone.
Precisely. If the traditional reasons feel a bit shaky, maybe someone else was pulling the strings. And Goza mentions there are a lot of these theories.
How many you're talking?
He says something like 50 or 60 different ones.
Wow, okay.
The core idea behind all of them is that Mitsuhide, on his own, couldn't possibly have taken down the great Nobunaga. There must have been a hidden mastermind, a kuamaku.
Okay, let's look at some prime suspects. What about the imperial court, the emperor himself?
That's the Chochite Kuromaku Setsu. The theory is the court felt threatened by Nobunaga getting too powerful, maybe even overshadowing the emperor, so they secretly ordered Mitsuhide to remove him.
Makes a kind of political sense on the surface. But what's Goza's view?
He's pretty skeptical. His key point is financial. Nobunaga was actually a huge benefactor to the court. He significantly improved their finances.
Right, they were doing better under him.
Exactly. So while they might have been annoyed about certain things, assassinating their main source of income, Goza argues it just doesn't add up logically. It would be shooting themselves in the foot.
Okay, that's a strong practical argument against it. Who's next on the conspiracy list? The old shogun.
Ashikage Yoshiaki. The Ashikage Yoshiaki Kuromaku Setsu. He had been exiled by Nobunaga, held a grudge, and Mitsuhide had previously served the Ashikaga shogunate. So the theory goes, Yoshiaki ordered his former retainer to get revenge.
And Goza mentioned talking to Fujita Tatsuo about this one.
Yeah, a little aside, Fujita apparently prefers calling it an involvement theory, Kanyo Setsu, rather than a full black hand theory, which is interesting.
Nuance matters. But what's Goza's main counter-argument to Yoshiaki being the puppet master?
It comes down to a letter. Specifically, a letter Mitsuhide sent to Hosokawa Fujitaka after the incident around June 9th.
Okay, what's significant about it?
Mitsuhide is trying desperately to get Fujitaka, who also served the Ashikaga, to join him. But crucially, Goza points out, the letter makes absolutely no mention of Ashikaga Yoshiaki.
Huh. You'd think he would mention their old boss if Yoshiaki was behind it all.
That's exactly Goza's point. Invoking Yoshiaki's name would have been the perfect justification, the best way to persuade Fujitaka. The fact that he doesn't mention him strongly suggests Yoshiaki wasn't involved beforehand. Silence speaks volumes here, according to Goza.
That's very compelling. Any other points against Yoshiaki's involvement?
Goza also notes the timing. Mitsuhide only starts making moves suggesting support for Yoshiaki's return around June 12th. That's way too late. He was defeated at Yamazaki the very next day.
Right. Too little, too late.
And Goza adds, if this was a coordinated plot involving Yoshiaki, you'd expect some cooperation with other anti-Nobunaga forces, like the Mu-tree, maybe to slow Hideyoshi down. But we don't see that coordination.
So the timeline's off, the communication's missing, the coordination isn't there. Doesn't look good for the Yoshiaki theory. Now, what about a really out there one? The Jesuits.
The Izusukai Kuromaku Setsu. This one, pushed by Tachibana Kyuchiko, is quite elaborate.
Let's run down.
Basically, the Jesuits secretly funded and armed Nobunaga to unify Japan, but their real goal was to use him to invade China and Christianize it. When Nobunaga became difficult or went off script, they had Mitsuhide kill him.
Okay.
And then supposedly they manipulated Hideyoshi to get rid of Mitsuhide, clearing the way for their grand plan, which eventually led to the Imjin War.
That's quite a narrative. What does Goza think? I imagine skepticism.
Extreme skepticism is putting it mildly. Goza stresses there's just zero credible historical evidence for the Jesuits having that level of influence or providing that kind of massive support to Nobunaga.
No documents, no letters, nothing.
Nothing reliable. Goza actually recounts asking Tachibana directly about this lack of evidence at a conference.
Oh, and what was the explanation?
Apparently her answer was that Hideyoshi conveniently destroyed all the proof.
Right. The old, all the evidence was destroyed argument.
Goza's reaction, as he tells it, was basically disbelief.
Right.
It's a theory that requires you to accept the premise that all counter-evidence was systematically eliminated.
Yeah, that's a tough sell without any corroboration. Okay, so we've looked at the traditional ideas and some major conspiracy theories. Now, Goza brings in a really critical factor, timing and contingency.
Yes, this is a really key part of Goza's analysis. He argues that for Mitsuhide's rebellion to even have a sliver of a chance, a very specific set of circumstances had to fall into place, and these were quite recent developments.
What were those circumstances?
First, Nobunaga's main generals, guys like Hideyoshi, Shibata Katsui, Nuwa Nagahide, needed to be busy fighting far away from the capital region, the Kinai. And second, Mitsuhide himself needed a legitimate reason to have a large army mobilized right near Kyoto.
And Goza points out these deployments weren't like long-term arrangements.
No, relatively recent. And crucially, the order for Mitsuhide to mobilize his forces, supposedly to go help Hideyoshi, only came down from Nobunaga on May 17th.
Just a couple of weeks before the incident on June 2nd.
Exactly. That order gave Mitsuhide the perfect cover to gather his troops near the capital. Goza sees this date, May 17th, as incredibly important.
It created the opportunity, essentially. What about the succession issue? Nobunaga's son and heir, Oda Nobutada.
Right. Nobutada was already holding significant power. If only Nobunaga was killed, the smart money was on the Oda forces rallying around Nobutada to crush Mitsuhide. So ideally, Mitsuhide needed to get rid of both of them.
But taking out both father and son simultaneously would be incredibly difficult, Goza argues.
Extremely difficult. Usually Nobunaga was in Azuchi Castle, and Nobutada was based in Gifu, attacking both locations at once. Logistically a nightmare, incredibly risky.
But then something unexpected happened.
Yes. Nobunaga decided to come to Kyoto. He only had a small escort, possibly because he was going to guide Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was visiting Sakai nearby.
Okay, so Nobunaga is in Kyoto, more vulnerable than usual.
And then, the really crucial bit. Nobutada, instead of staying in Gifu, decided quite suddenly to also come to Kyoto to greet his father. This happened around May 27th.
Wow. So all of a sudden, both Nobunaga and Nobutada are in Kyoto, together with relatively light security.
Exactly. This, for Goza, is the pivotal moment. A totally unexpected, narrow window of opportunity opened up where both main targets were vulnerable in the same place.
And Goza links this to the poetry gathering, the Amega Shita Hyakun, on May 28th.
Yes, he suggests the timing is uncanny. This golden opportunity appears around the 27th, and on the 28th, Mitsuhide is at this gathering, maybe reciting that debated poem. Goza posits that Mitsuhide saw this sudden, unique chance and decided to act fast.
So it wasn't some grand, long-brewing conspiracy orchestrated by a black hand. It was more about seizing a fleeting moment created by Nobunaga's own movements.
That's Goza's central argument here. This specific vulnerable situation wasn't something a third party could have easily arranged. It arose from Nobunaga's own choices, aligning with what Rushaguichi, a contemporary chronicler, hinted at, that Nobunaga kind of brought it on himself.
The emphasis really shifts to contingency, to chance almost.
Yes, and it makes sense of why Mitsuhide apparently didn't even tell his close ally Hosokawa Fujitaka beforehand.
Right, we mentioned that letter where he tries to persuade Fujitaka after the fact.
Exactly. If it was a sudden decision based on this unexpected opportunity, secrecy would be paramount. Telling allies beforehand increases the risk of leaks. It points towards a solo opportunistic strike.
Okay, so if it was an opportunistic move, what did Mitsuhide actually plan to do after killing Nobunaga and Nobutada? Did he have an endgame?
That's the million-dollar question. Goza looks back at the Muromachi period for possible precedents.
Like what?
Well, you had instances like the Miyoshi clan effectively controlling Kyoto for a time, even without a shogun in place. Or when they assassinated Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiteru. It showed that central power could operate, at least short-term, in a kind of vacuum.
So there was precedent for ruling without immediately installing a new shogun.
Goza suggests so. While long-term stability probably needed a shogun, Mitsuhide, having served both the Ashikaga and Nobunaga, knew how complicated puppet shoguns could be.
Right, they weren't always easy to manage.
So Goza thinks Mitsuhide's likely first step was pragmatic. Secure the Kinai, the capital region, get control on the ground first, then figure out the legitimacy part, maybe negotiate with Yoshiaki, maybe install Yoshiaki's adopted son as a figurehead he could control more easily.
So practical steps first, worry about the shogun later. Makes sense. Now, we probably should touch on one more black hand theory, one involving Tokugawa Ieyasu, mainly because it's quite dramatic. Akechi Kinzaburu's theory.
Ah, yes, that one certainly has drama. Akechi Kinzaburo posits a really complex scenario. Nobunaga plans to invade Ming China, the Karayuri. He sees Ieyasu as a potential rival or obstacle to this plan.
Okay.
So Nobunaga secretly orders Mitsuhide to assassinate Ieyasu during his visit. But Mitsuhide also opposes the China invasion, maybe fearing his clan would be wiped out.
So Mitsuhide warns Ieyasu.
Yes, according to this theory, he warns Ieyasu and the two of them conspire to turn the tables and assassinate Nobunaga instead.
A double cross. It sounds like a movie plot. What's Goza's take? Highly critical, I assume.
Extremely critical. First off, Goza points out the whole China invasion plan itself is pretty speculative, mainly mentioned by Louis Fra, who wasn't always strictly factual.
Okay, so the premise itself is shaky.
Very. And even if Nobunaga thought about it, there's zero proof Mitsuhide knew, let alone was ordered to kill Ieyasu over it. Akechi Kenzaburu's theory just stacks speculation on top of speculation. What if Mitsuhide knew this? What if he feared that?
Lots of what-ifs.
Exactly. Goza finds it implausible Mitsuhide would believe his whole clan was doomed, or that he'd trust Ieyasu enough to betray Nobunaga based on such a hypothetical future. And why would Nobunaga eliminate a powerful ally like Ieyasu when he still had active campaigns going on? It doesn't add up strategically for Goza.
It does seem like a real stretch. What about the evidence Akechi Kenzaburo uses from that diary, the Matsudara Yada diary, about Anayama Beisetsu's death?
Right. Akechi Kenzaburo interprets an entry about Anayama's death to mean Ieyasu had him killed after escaping back to Mikawa, painting Ieyasu as ruthless. But Gosa actually looked at the physical diary, and he notes additions, corrections, signs that the entries might not be perfectly chronological. It looks more like Ieyatada jotting down confusing, uncertain information as it came in during a chaotic time. Goza argues it's not definitive proof Ieyasu ordered the killing after getting back.
So again, the evidence is ambiguous, not the smoking gun Akechi Kenzaburo claims it is. One last potential player, Hideyoshi. Any chance he knew what Mitsuhide was up to?
Some historians, like Fujita Tatsuo, have floated that possibility. Akechi Kenzaburo also suggests it, maybe building on Fujita's idea, claiming Hideyoshi found out via Hosokawa Fujitaka. The speed of Hideyoshi's return, the famous Chugoku Ugeishi, is often cited as suspicious.
He did get back incredibly fast.
He did, but Goza offers a counterpoint. News traveled faster than we might think. We see from Ietada's diary that news of Honnō-ji reached Mikawa relatively quickly, too. Speed is an automatic proof of foreknowledge.
What about Hideyoshi promising safe conduct to Hosokawa Fujitaka later?
Goza interprets that as smart politics. After Mitsuhide's defeat, Hideyoshi needed allies among the Oda retainers. Guaranteeing Fujitaka's safety, even though Fujitaka didn't actively help Mitsuhide, was a way to win support in the ensuing power struggle, not necessarily a reward for prior collusion.
A strategic move in the aftermath, not proof of plotting beforehand. It seems Goza consistently brings us back to the immediate context, the specific circumstances, rather than grand conspiracies.
That's a fair summary. His analysis really emphasizes contingency, opportunity, and the actions of the individuals directly involved, especially Nobunaga and Mitsuhide themselves.
So wrapping this up, the Honnō-ji Incident, it really is still a puzzle, isn't it? The traditional grudge and ambition theories have some serious holes when you look closely at the evidence.
Yeah, they're not as solid as you might think.
And these elaborate black hand theories, while often intriguing, tend to lack that hard proof and rely heavily on speculation.
Goza's work really highlights that. He steers us towards thinking about the specific conditions of late May and early June 1582.
That sudden, unexpected window of opportunity where both Nobunaga and Nobutada were vulnerable in Kyoto. Goza makes a strong case that this contingency might be the key.
It's a compelling argument, shifting focus from long-term motives to a short-term, high-stakes gamble prompted by unforeseen circumstances.
And it leaves us with this enduring mystery, with no definitive why from Mitsuhide, and so many theories swirling around. What does it tell us? Maybe something about the limits of history, how we crave clear narratives for complex events.
That's a great question to leave things on. Why does this particular event still grip our imaginations so much? Perhaps it's precisely because there isn't a simple answer, forcing us to confront the ambiguities and uncertainties of the past.
Definitely something to think about. We encourage you to explore the sources and different takes on Honnō-ji further. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.